I woke up as usual, without an alarm clock at 6:30 in the morning. Sleep had become light and short after Martha died 3 years ago, but I didn't complain about it. It was better to wake up rested at 5 in the morning than to toss and turn in bed until noon with a sore back and a heavy head. I got up, stretched, and walked barefoot across the warm parquet floor of the bedroom. My left knee ached a little, but no more than usual. An old war injury that reminded me of itself from time to time. I took a quick shower with hot water, as I had gotten used to doing in the army. The mirror reflected a fairly strong 73-year-old man with gray stubble and clear blue eyes. Not handsome, of course, but not a wreck either. Martha always said that I had a stubborn chin and that it was what helped me get through all the hardships. She was right. That chin really did help me survive the Vietnam War, my divorce from my first wife, the bankruptcy of my construction company in the 80s, and even Martha's death from that damn cancer. I always ate a hearty breakfast, a habit developed over decades of physical labor. 3 fried eggs with bacon, fried potatoes with onions, toast with butter and jam, coffee with cream and sugar. The doctor kept talking about cholesterol and the need to diet, but at my age, strict restrictions seem silly. Better to eat what you want and enjoy yourself than to choke on low-fat cottage cheese and boiled chicken for the sake of a phantom extra 5 years of life. After breakfast, I put on an old plaid shirt and faded jeans and went out to the yard to check on the tomatoes. My plot in Louisville wasn't big, just a quarter of an acre, but I kept it in perfect order. Neighbors often stopped to admire Martha's roses, which I continued to grow in her memory, following all her instructions to the letter, as recorded in a worn notebook. The red mister. Lincoln bushes had been blooming for 4 months in a row, despite the fact that August had been particularly hot and dry. The tomatoes were filling with juice. In a week, I would be able to harvest the first serious crop. I grew 4 varieties: cherry tomatoes for salads, large beefsteak tomatoes for sandwiches, cream tomatoes for canning, and yellow tomatoes for variety. Martha loved yellow tomatoes, saying they were sweeter and more tender than red ones. Now I grew them out of habit and gave them away to my neighbors. I couldn't eat that many myself. "Good morning, Mr. Clarkson," Mrs. Jennings called over the low wooden fence. She was watering her colorful petunias from an old green watering can that she had inherited from her late mother. "Morning, Carol. How are the grandchildren?" "Oh, they're coming for the weekend. The youngest is already finishing college. Can you believe it? Time flies so fast. Aren't Murphy and his wife supposed to come by today?" I nodded, picking an especially large ripe tomato and placing it in a wicker basket. "Yes, they promised to come by after lunch. They say they have an important conversation to have. How nice that they care about you and visit you regularly." I just grunted in response, not wanting to disappoint the kind woman. Carol was a true Christian, a naive and bright soul. In her mind, adult children automatically turned into caring guardian angels as soon as their parents reached retirement age. It was a pity that reality often turned out to be much more complicated and cynical than the ideas of decent people. Returning to the house with a basket of vegetables, I set about cleaning thoroughly. Not because I was sloppy. On the contrary, I had loved order since my youth. But because Sheila always found the slightest reason for nitpicking and criticism. It was dust on the bookshelf in the corner, barely noticeable smudges on the mirror in the hallway, or a few crumbs on the kitchen table after breakfast. Murph remained silent and looked away, even though as a child his own room constantly resembled a battlefield after an artillery barrage. He vacuumed the entire living room, paying special attention to the corners under the sofa, wiped all the furniture with a damp, soft cloth, and washed all the dishes in the sink until they sparkled. He carefully checked the supplies in the refrigerator: fresh milk, half a dozen eggs, good cheddar cheese, leftovers from yesterday's beef roast with potatoes, bacon, butter. There was enough for a normal person, but Sheila would surely find a way to claim that the refrigerator was practically empty and that he had nothing to eat. She had an amazing talent for creating serious problems out of thin air. She could talk for hours about how dangerous it is for an elderly person to live alone in such a big house, how easy it is to fall on slippery steps, how scary it is if you have a heart attack and there is no one to help you. At the same time, she never once offered to move in with them or even install an alarm button. Around noon, when the sun was high and the house was really hot, my old neighbor Ray Collins came in. We had been friends for over 20 years, ever since he moved into the nice house across the street with his wife and two young sons. Ray was exactly 8 years younger than me, but he looked noticeably older. The hard years of working at a chemical plant, where he had worked for almost 4 decades, had taken their toll. "How's it going, old man?" Ray habitually sat down in Martha's favorite armchair by the window, where she always read her novels. "Just waiting for some guests. My son and daughter-in-law are coming over." "Oh, the one who works as an insurance agent downtown." "That's the one. He sells policies to wealthy retirees." Ray nodded his gray head in understanding. "I don't understand these modern kids, honestly. My two also call about once a month, politely asking about my health and how things are going. But they're in no hurry to visit. They have their own lives to live. At least they don't need money from you. They earn pretty well themselves." "Is Murph asking or hinting at something again?" I shrugged as I poured myself some cold iced tea. Over the last few months, Murph had indeed been asking about my financial situation more and more often and more insistently. He asked about the state of my bank accounts, insisted that I sell my oversized house and move to a compact apartment in the city closer to hospitals, and talked about the need for his help with various documents and paperwork. All of this was invariably presented under the guise of sincere concern for my well-being and safety. He's not asking directly yet, but he's constantly hinting at it. He's assessing the situation, so to speak. Ray smiled knowingly and rubbed his bald head. "Hang in there. Don't give in to his persuasion. My cousin lost all his money because he was foolish. His son spent a long time persuading him to sell the family home, saying they would invest the proceeds in a reliable business, and he would live like a king on the interest. In the end, the son lost the money in some kind of pyramid scheme, and now the old man is forced to rent a tiny one-room apartment on the outskirts of town. I'm not such a fool, Ray, to fall for such nonsense. I know that very well, but still, God protects those who protect themselves, as they say." We talked for another half hour about trivial things. The weather, the neighbors, what was going on in the country. Ray was a good conversationalist, didn't give advice or try to teach me about life, just a normal guy who understood the value of honest friendship. After Ray left, I slowly walked through the house again, carefully checking that everything was ready for the upcoming visit. In the bright living room, I neatly rearranged the soft pillows on the sofa, hung fresh blue towels in the bathroom, and wiped down the already clean table in the kitchen once more. Martha always prepared for the arrival of any guests as if it were a real holiday, even if it was just the plumber or the mailman. I diligently continued this good tradition, although my sincere joy at Murphy's, and especially Sheila's visits, was diminishing with each visit. At 1:30, I sat down in my favorite armchair with a newspaper. I read slowly and thoughtfully as Martha had taught me. She said that hasty reading was a sign of a superficial mind. The newspaper wrote about the latest political scandal, rising gasoline prices, and local news. Nothing particularly interesting, but time passed unnoticed. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as agreed in advance, a familiar silver Toyota of the latest model pulled up in the yard. I looked out the window and saw Murphy and Sheila slowly getting out of the car and heading for the porch. My son looked noticeably tired, his dark suit hanging loosely on him, as if he had lost weight in recent months. Sheila, on the other hand, was dressed to the nines. An elegant light-colored dress, impeccable hairstyle, an expensive leather handbag of the latest model. She always dressed as if she were going to an important business meeting with influential people, rather than visiting her father-in-law on the outskirts of Louisville. He opened the door before they had a chance to ring the bell. He always did that. He didn't like guests waiting at the door. "Hi, Dad." Murphy hugged me awkwardly, as always. There was a certain formality to his embrace, as if he were performing an unpleasant duty. "Hello, Lemmet." Sheila kissed me on the cheek, leaving a faint trace of pink lipstick. I showed them into the living room and offered them coffee, tea, or something stronger. Murphy asked for plain water, and Sheila politely declined everything. She was already scanning the room with her usual appraising gaze, as if estimating the value of the furniture and other items. "How are you, son? Is work going well?" "Yes, everything's fine. There are enough clients, but the competition is growing. How are you feeling? How's your health?" "No complaints so far." Sheila shook her head with the look of someone who has to deal with a hopelessly stubborn old man. Lemmet, you have to be honest with us about how you feel. At your age, you can't play the hero and hide your problems. Here we go again. Another polite attack on my independence under the usual guise of concern for my health and safety. Lemmet, you need to be honest with us about how you're feeling. At your age, you can't play the hero and hide problems, Sheila said, settling down on the sofa and folding her hands in her lap. I brought Murphy a glass of water and sat down in my chair opposite them. Shalala continued to scan the room with a gaze that always seemed too attentive to me. She noticed every little thing, the scuff on the armrest of the sofa, the small crack in the frame of Martha's photo, the stain on the carpet that I had never been able to remove. I really feel fine, I replied calmly. My knee hurts sometimes, but it's an old injury. Nothing serious. Murph cleared his throat and leaned forward, assuming the posture of a caring son. Dad, we're just worried about you. You live alone in such a big house, and if something happens, what could happen? The house is in great shape. The neighbors are nearby. The phone works. But what if you have a heart attack? Sheila spoke in the tone people usually use to explain obvious things to small children. Or you fall down the stairs. At your age, your bones become fragile. I couldn't help but smile. Fragile bones. At 73, I could still lift a bag of cement, although I did so less and less often. But Sheila needed to see me as a frail old man who was about to fall apart. My bones are fine for now, and if something happens, the neighbors have keys. Lemmet, neighbors are not the solution to the problem. Shalal shook her head with the look of someone who was tired of someone else's stubbornness. Carol is no longer a young woman, and Mr. Collins works. They can't watch over you all the time. Murph nodded in support of his wife. Dad, we thought you should consider options for safer living. What options? I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear it out loud. There are excellent nursing homes, Sheila perked up, as if she were talking about a resort. There are nurses on duty around the clock, meals are provided, and there are leisure programs. You'll be among people your own age, you won't feel lonely. I don't feel lonely. But think about it, she continued to insist. This house is too big for one person. 3 bedrooms, 2 floors, a large yard. How much time and energy does it take to keep it tidy? I looked at my son. Murphy avoided my gaze, studying his shoes. He used to do the same thing when he was a child, when he was lying or hiding something. I like taking care of the house and garden. It gives me a purpose. But it's so tiring, Sheila sighed dramatically. And besides, the house is getting old with you. Soon it will need serious repairs. The roof, heating, plumbing. That's a huge expense. So we've come to money. I was waiting for this turn in the conversation. I have savings for repairs. But why spend it on an old house? Murphy finally looked up. Dad, be realistic. Sooner or later, you're going to need help anyway. It's better to think about it in advance, while there's still time to organize everything calmly. Sheila stood up and walked across the room, stopping at the window. You know, we saw a very nice place 20 minutes from our house. It has beautiful grounds, a lake, a library, and most importantly, top-notch medical care. How much does it cost? Not that much if we sell the house, Murphy said quickly, as if afraid I would change my mind about listening. Real estate in this area has gone up in price. The real estate agent thinks we can get a decent amount for it. Okay. They had already spoken to a real estate agent. I wonder when that happened. You've already consulted with an agent? Without me? There was an awkward pause. Shalila returned to the sofa, and Murph blushed like a child caught in a lie. We just wanted to know the approximate value, he mumbled, to understand what our options are. Our options? I raised an eyebrow. This is my house, Murph. Of course, Dad, but we're a family. We have to plan for the future together. Sheila put her hand on her husband's knee, a gesture of support and at the same time a signal not to say anything more. Lemmet, we understand that this is a difficult decision. This house is full of memories of Martha, but she wouldn't want you to suffer. The mention of Martha made me angry. Sheila barely knew my wife. They had only met a few times before her death, and now my sister-in-law dared to speculate about what Martha would have wanted. Martha would want me to be happy, and I'm happy here. But that's not forever, Sheila persisted. While you're still able to make your own decisions, It's better to think things through. Otherwise, later, she paused, giving me a chance to finish her sentence. Later what? Later they would make the decisions for me? Dad, we're not forcing you, Murphy said, even though that's exactly what they were doing. Just think about it. We can go and see a few places, talk to the administration. And the real estate agent? Well, yes, we can meet with him too, just to find out the details. I got up and walked over to the window. Tomatoes were growing peacefully in the yard. Martha's roses were blooming in the flower bed, and the neighbor's ginger cat was napping on the porch. They wanted me to give all of this up for a government-provided room in a nursing home. What will happen to the garden? The garden? Sheila clearly didn't expect that question. Martha's roses, the tomatoes. Who will take care of them? Lemmet, the new owners will take care of the plot themselves, she said patiently, as if talking to a capricious child. So they'll just uproot everything. Perhaps, but they're just plants. Just plants. The roses that Martha planted with her own hands, which I watered every morning for 3 years. The tomatoes whose seeds we chose together in the last spring of her life. Just plants. I turned to them. Thank you for your concern, but I'm not ready for such changes yet. Sheila's face twisted with irritation for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Of course, you need time. We understand that, but promise to at least think about it. I'll think about it. Murph stood up, apparently realizing that the conversation was over for today. Then we'll go. But Dad, if you need anything, call us right away. I will. Sheila also stood up but lingered over Martha's photo on the mantelpiece. What's that paint mark on the wall? She pointed to a barely noticeable spot near the frame. I didn't notice it. Where exactly? Right here. It looks like the paint is peeling. Is it from moisture? I moved closer. There was no moisture, just old paint that had cracked slightly in one spot. A minor issue that could be fixed in half an hour. I'll touch it up over the weekend. See? Sheila turned to Murphy. The house really does need constant attention. At your age, it becomes a problem. They left, leaving behind the feeling that something had changed in my house. It was as if they had come not to visit, but to inspect, looking for flaws and problems where there were none. After they left, I sat in the living room for a long time, thinking about the conversation. Something about Murphy and Sheila's behavior alarmed me more and more. They were too insistent on promoting the idea of selling the house, too quick to move from general phrases about security to specific figures and real estate agents. And this moment with the consultation that had already taken place, they had clearly planned it all in advance, without my involvement. The next day they came again, which was quite unusual. Usually Murphy and his wife visited me once a week, twice a month at most. And here they were, visiting for the second time in a row, without warning. Hi, Dad. Murphy looked a little nervous. We decided to stop by and see how you were doing. And we brought you some small gifts, Sheila added, handing me a bag from an expensive store. Inside were some expensive coffee, a box of chocolates, and a beautiful leather-bound notebook. Gifts without a reason always made me suspicious. In our family, they were given either on holidays or when someone wanted something. Thank you, but why spend so much? We just wanted to spoil you, Sheila smiled. Can I take a few pictures? I want to show my mom how cozy your home is. It was a strange reason, considering that her mother lived in California and was hardly interested in the interiors of other people's homes. But I nodded. It would have seemed rude to refuse such a small request. Sheila took out her phone and started taking pictures. First, she took a general view of the living room, then the fireplace with photos of Martha, then the bookshelves. Her attention was drawn to an antique vase, a wedding gift from my parents, then a painting above the sofa, the work of a local artist that Martha and I had bought many years ago at a charity auction. What a beautiful vase, she exclaimed, pointing her camera at it. And this painting is just wonderful. Is it real? It's real. The artist died about 10 years ago, and his works are now quite valuable. Shalila photographed the painting from different angles, then moved on to the antique chest of drawers that we had inherited from Martha's grandmother. Meanwhile, Murphy walked around the room, stopping at the windows. Dad, are the panes loose in the frames? He pushed the window frame. Sometimes that's a problem in old houses. No, everything's fine. He checked a few more windows, carefully examining the frames and windowsills. His behavior seemed strange to me. Murph usually showed no interest in the technical condition of the house. "Can we look upstairs?" Sheila asked. "I haven't been in Martha's bedroom in a long time." We went up to the second floor. In the master bedroom, Sheila started taking pictures again. An antique dressing table, an old clock on the dresser, embroidered pillows on the bed. Murph opened and closed the dresser drawers, checking the condition of the furniture. "Is this dresser still my grandfather's?" he asked, tapping on the wooden surface. "Yes, it's probably 100 years old. Good wood, quality workmanship." As a child, Murphy had never been interested in antique furniture or family heirlooms, but now he examined each item with the eye of an appraiser. We went into the room that used to be the study. There was an old desk, bookshelves that reached the ceiling, and an armchair where I sometimes read in the evenings. Sheila took pictures of this room too, paying special attention to the books. Among them were several rare editions that Martha had collected. "Wow, you have so many books," and she exclaimed. "Have you read them all?" "Most of them." Martha read the rest. "What about these old ones?" She pointed to a shelf with antique volumes. "Some are over 100 years old." Sheila photographed the spines of the books, then the desk with its numerous drawers and brass handles. In the guest bedroom, she also found things to photograph: an antique mirror, lace doilies, a small collection of porcelain figurines that Martha's mother-in-law had collected. "Such cute little things," she said, photographing each figurine separately. Murph was checking the condition of the radiators, inspecting the baseboards, and even looking into the bathroom. His behavior was becoming increasingly strange. "Son, have you decided to become a home inspector?" "No, I'm just curious about how the house is holding up," he said, embarrassed. "At our age, we need to keep an eye on these things." At our age, Murphy was 45 years old. Going downstairs, we walked into the kitchen. Shalila continued to take pictures. An old meat grinder that my mother had used, a set of silver spoons in a display case, copper pots hanging on hooks. "Is this real silver?" she asked, pointing to the set in the sideboard. "Yes, a wedding gift from Martha's parents." "How beautiful." The camera shutter clicked. Meanwhile, Murphy opened the cupboard doors, looked under the sink, and checked the faucets. It seemed as if he was looking for signs of malfunction or damage. "Dad, are the pipes leaking?" "They're old, aren't they?" "I replaced them 15 years ago. Everything's fine." "What about the heating? Is the boiler working properly?" "Yes, it's working fine." But Murphy wasn't satisfied. He went down to the basement, where I keep my tools and gardening equipment. I could hear him moving around down there, obviously inspecting something. "Murph wants to make sure the house is okay," Sheila explained, continuing to photograph the kitchen utensils. "He's so worried about you." Worried. He didn't go down to my basement for years, and now he's suddenly interested in the condition of the utilities. When we returned to the living room, Sheila asked permission to take a picture of us with Murphy. "For the family album," she said, pointing the camera. We sat down on the sofa, and she took several pictures. Then she asked to take a picture of me alone in the armchair, then by the fireplace, then by the window. Too many photos for a simple family album. "Can I take a video?" she asked. "Mom loves it when I tell her about our visits." She turned on the video and began filming the room, slowly turning her phone and commenting. "This is Lemit's living room, where he spends most of his time, and this is the fireplace, with photos of dear Martha nearby. What a cozy house, isn't it?" The video recording lasted about 5 minutes. Sheila walked around the entire room, filming the furniture, the paintings, and even peeking into the hallway in the entrance hall. Strange behavior for someone who just wants to show the house to his mother-in-law's distant relative. After lunch, we went out into the garden, and here my guest's behavior became even more suspicious. Murphy carefully examined the foundation of the house, walked along all the walls, checking the masonry. Meanwhile, Sheila was photographing the property, the rose bushes, the greenhouse, the tool shed, even the compost heap in the far corner. "How big is the property?" she asked, gesturing toward the yard. "A quarter of an acre." "And it's all yours?" "Of course. Why?" "Just curious. That's a lot of land for one person." She photographed the property lines, the neighboring houses, even the street in front of the house. Murphy was tapping on the walls of the shed, checking their strength. "Dad, does the roof leak?" he called from above, having climbed onto the garden ladder. No, I replaced it last year. Is the garage in good condition? Excellent. But he went into the garage anyway and spent 10 minutes there, examining every corner. What could he be looking for? Old paint cans and garden tools? By evening, their behavior began to seriously alarm me. Too much attention to the technical condition of the house, too many photos, too many questions about the size, age, and cost of everything around them. Well, it's time for us to go, Murphy finally said. Thanks for showing us the house. Showing them the house. As if I were giving a tour to potential buyers. Yes, thank you for a wonderful day, Sheila added, putting her phone in her purse. You have such beautiful things, and the house is in excellent condition. After they left, I walked around the house again, trying to figure out what exactly was bothering me. Everything was in its place. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken. But the feeling of an intrusion did not leave me. They were not looking at my house as guests or relatives. They were examining it as a commodity they were going to sell. They photographed every valuable item, checked its technical condition, and assessed its size and location. And all this under the guise of family photos and concern for my well-being. In the evening, I sat down in an armchair with a cup of coffee and tried to assess the situation soberly. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just imagining problems where there weren't any. But my instinct, developed over 73 years of life, told me that something was wrong here. Murph and Sheila were planning something, and those plans involved my house, my belongings, and most likely me. The only question was what exactly they had in mind and how far they were willing to go. 3 days later, Murph and Sheila came for the third time that week. There hadn't been visits this frequent in years, and it couldn't help but be alarming. They explained that they had come to bring me blood pressure medication, which I had supposedly forgotten to buy at the pharmacy. However, my blood pressure had been completely normal for the past few months, and I hadn't asked for any medication, let alone forgotten to buy it. Dad, you need to take better care of your health, said Murphy, handing me a white bag from the city's central pharmacy. At our age, prevention becomes vitally important. Again, that annoying "at our age," as if my 45-year-old son already had one foot in the grave. I took the bag, deciding not to argue pointlessly. Inside were indeed blood pressure pills, expensive, imported, in beautiful packaging, with holograms of authenticity. It was strange that they had spent their own money on them, since I hadn't asked for them and didn't need such treatment. Thank you for your concern, but my blood pressure has been normal for several months now. You should still take the full course, insisted Shalala, looking like someone who knows more about medicine than doctors. It's much better to prevent a serious problem in advance than to treat the consequences for a long and painful time. She was dressed much more casually than usual. Simple blue jeans, an ordinary white blouse without any embellishments, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail with an elastic band. Apparently she didn't plan to stay long or wanted to look comfortable. Murph was also dressed casually, in an old plaid shirt that I remembered from his college days and worn brown trousers. Can we sit here with you for a while? Sheila asked in a tone that suggested she was doing us a favor. We have some free time today and I'm sure you're tired of being alone. Tired of being alone, as if I were a misanthropic recluse who hadn't seen a living soul in months and was tormented by loneliness. Although just yesterday I spent over an hour talking to Ray Collins about political news, and the day before that I spent half the day helping Mrs. Jennings repair the broken garden fence between our properties. We settled down in the spacious living room, they on the sofa, I in my usual armchair by the window. But the conversation didn't flow at all, despite all my attempts to strike up a casual chat. Murphy was clearly nervous, constantly glancing at his wristwatch, fidgeting and answering any questions with monosyllables. Shalila mechanically leafed through a women's magazine she had taken from my coffee table, but it was obvious that she wasn't reading the articles, just mindlessly turning the glossy pages, looking somewhere else as she did so. Dad, can I go upstairs to the bathroom? Murph asked after 20 minutes of such tense silence. Of course, son. You know the way. He headed for the stairs and went up to the second floor, even though there was a perfectly decent bathroom downstairs in the hallway next to the kitchen, which he had been using since childhood. Shalala continued to leaf through the magazine aimlessly, but I noticed that she was listening intently to the sounds coming from upstairs. Murphy was up there for quite a long time, 10 minutes, maybe more. I could hear his unhurried footsteps in one room, then another, then a third. What could he be doing in all these rooms for so long? When he finally came back downstairs, he and Shalila exchanged a brief but very eloquent silent glance. She nodded slightly to him, raising her eyebrows questioningly. Murphy also nodded slowly in response, and a look of satisfaction flashed across his face. Some kind of secret correspondence between them, the true meaning of which remained completely unclear to me. "Well, perhaps we could take a little walk around your wonderful garden," Sheila suggested, closing the magazine and getting up from the sofa. "The weather is so beautiful, it would be a shame to stay indoors." We went out into the yard through the back door of the kitchen, and here their behavior became even more strange and suspicious than it had been in the house. They began to examine everything around them with the same professional, appraising attention, carefully checking the condition of the wooden fence separating my property from my neighbors, looking into the glass greenhouse where I grew seedlings, walking around the entire perimeter of the house, studying the foundation and walls. Murph even climbed into the old garden tool shed and rummaged around there for a long time, going through my things. "What are you looking for, son?" I shouted, beginning to lose my patience. "Just looking at your tools," came his muffled voice from deep inside the shed. "I must say, you've got a nice collection of useful things here. A collection of tools." The old wooden shed contained the most ordinary gardening tools that had accumulated over decades of farming. Worn shovels of various sizes, iron rakes, rose pruning shears, a hand mower, a hoe, buckets, and watering cans. Nothing special or valuable that could be called a collection, even with a stretch. Meanwhile, Shalila slowly walked around the plot, stopping from time to time and carefully examining Martha's rose bushes, the fruit trees in the far corner of the garden, and the new greenhouse I had built 2 years ago. She even looked behind the compost heap, as if checking the boundaries of my property. "How big is your plot exactly?" she asked, gesturing with her hand across the entire yard. "Exactly 1/4 of an acre, like most plots in this area. And it's all yours without any restrictions?" "Of course. Why do you ask?" "I was just curious. Such a large area for one elderly person is a big responsibility and a considerable physical burden." She took out her phone and began taking pictures of the plot from different angles. Rose bushes, fruit trees, a greenhouse, a shed with tools, even an inconspicuous compost heap in the far corner. Then she photographed the boundaries of the plot, the neighboring houses visible behind the hedge, even the quiet street in front of my house with its old maple and linden trees. Murph, having finally emerged from the shed, began tapping on the wooden walls of the extension, as if checking their strength and reliability. "Dad, does the roof of the main house leak?" he shouted, climbing up the old garden ladder and trying to look at the tiled roof. "No, I had the entire roof completely renovated last year. Everything is in excellent condition." "What about the garage? Is the foundation there okay?" "The foundation is perfect. I built the garage myself 30 years ago. I know every brick." But Murphy still went into the spacious garage and spent a full 15 minutes there, carefully examining every corner, every wall, even looking under the workbench and shelves with tools. What could he be looking for that was so important? Old cans of dried paint and rusty garden tools I hadn't used in years? By early evening, their suspicious behavior was seriously alarming and even frightening me. They paid too much attention to the technical condition of all the buildings, took too many photos, and asked too many specific questions about the size, age, cost of repairs, and market price of everything around them. I got the distinct impression that they were professional real estate appraisers. "Well, it's time to go home," Murphy finally said, glancing at his watch. "Thanks, Dad, for letting us look around." Look around, as if I were really giving an official tour to potential buyers or insurance agents. "Yes, thank you so much for a wonderful day," added Sheila, putting her cell phone away in her expensive leather handbag. "You really have some very beautiful and valuable things. And the house, I must admit, is in remarkably good condition for its age." After they left, I walked around the house and garden for a long time, trying to understand what exactly was bothering and disturbing me so much. All the items remained in their usual places. Nothing was missing or broken. Nothing had changed outwardly. But the persistent feeling of an alien intrusion and some kind of hidden threat did not leave me for a minute. They examined my house and property, not at all like ordinary guests or loving relatives who had come to visit their elderly father and father-in-law. They studied everything as if it were expensive merchandise that they were going to put up for sale in the near future. They photographed every potentially valuable item, carefully checked the technical condition of all the buildings, and assessed their size and advantageous location. And all this was carefully disguised as innocent family photos and sincere concern for my health and well-being. In the evening, I sat down in my favorite armchair with a cup of hot coffee and tried to assess the situation soberly and objectively. Maybe I really am a budding paranoid. Maybe I'm just inventing non-existent problems and dangers where there really aren't any. But my survival instinct, developed and honed over 73 long and difficult years of life, persistently told me that something was definitely wrong here. Something very, very wrong. Murphy and Sheila were clearly planning something serious behind my back, and those plans directly concerned my home, all my possessions, and apparently me myself. The only question was what exactly they had in mind and how far they were willing to go to carry out their plans. 2 days later, on Tuesday evening, I got the answers to all my questions, and those answers turned out to be much worse than my darkest assumptions. At around 7 p.m., as I was peacefully reading the newspaper in the living room, I heard the familiar sound of a car engine in the yard. I looked out the window and saw that silver Toyota Murpha parked near my house. It was very strange, because they had left only 3 hours ago after another friendly visit. Had they forgotten something important in the house? I headed for the front door, expecting to hear a ring or a knock, but nothing followed. I waited a whole minute, then cautiously looked outside. The car was completely empty, the headlights off, the engine turned off. Where were Murphy and Sheila then? Walking around the house from the side porch, I saw them at the far end of the garden, near an old spreading apple tree that my father had planted. They had their backs to me and were talking quietly but animatedly about something. Their behavior seemed extremely suspicious to me. Why hide in the far corner of the garden and hold secret talks when they could just go into the house and talk openly? I cautiously approached them, trying not to make the slightest noise and not to reveal my presence. There were about 30 to 35 meters between us, but the evening silence and the absence of wind allowed me to hear fragments of their confidential conversation quite clearly. Did he definitely say he would come on Wednesday? Shalila said in an anxious tone. Yes, on Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, Murphy replied confidently. Dr. Hendricks will be here at the appointed time. Everything has already been paid for in advance. Dr. Hendricks. I had never heard that name among the doctors I had dealt with in my life. And why would some unfamiliar doctor come to my house if I hadn't called him and didn't need medical attention? Are you absolutely sure he'll write the report we need? Shalila's voice clearly betrayed her serious concern. Don't worry, dear. He's done this kind of thing for our friends before. For $5,000 in cash, this guy will write any report we ask for. $5,000 in cash? For what kind of medical report? And why was there talk of writing something rather than an actual medical examination? I crept closer, hiding behind the overgrown blackcurrant bushes. Now I could hear their secret conversation, almost word for word. The main condition is that the old man doesn't suspect anything in advance, Murphy continued in a calmer tone. If he realizes that the doctor is fake and corrupt, he might raise unnecessary noise and ruin everything. What if he categorically refuses any medical examination? He won't refuse, I know him. We'll just say that it's a mandatory routine checkup to renew his medical insurance or something like that. He'll believe it and won't argue. They plan to deceive me, to bring a fake doctor to me under false pretenses. But why did they need a fake medical report? And as soon as we get the report we need, we'll file all the documents with the court? Sheila asked briskly. On the very same day, without any delays. Our lawyer Simpson has already prepared all the necessary papers and is just waiting for the medical certificate. As soon as we receive the official certificate of my father's incapacity, we will immediately go to court to apply for guardianship. Incapacity, guardianship. These terrible words struck me like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. They planned to have me officially declared mentally ill with the help of a bribed doctor and obtain legal rights to control my entire life. What about the house and the rest of the property? Sheila lowered her voice, but I could still hear every word clearly. Realtor Johnson says we can get at least $350,000 for the house and land. Maybe even much more, if we're lucky with buyers and the market doesn't crash. And when can we start official showings to potential buyers? As soon as we finalize the guardianship through the court. Legally, I will be able to sell any of his property on his behalf as the legal guardian of an incapacitated person. They wanted to sell my house, the house I built with my own hands where I lived with Martha for 40 years, where all our shared memories were stored, to sell it without my consent, against my will, by fraudulently obtaining legal rights to dispose of my property. And where do we plan to put the old man himself? Shalila's question sounded completely mundane and indifferent, as if she were talking about unnecessary old furniture that needed to be disposed of. To a nursing home on Maplewood Street. It's cheap and quite far from the city center. We won't visit him too often. And how much money does he have in his bank accounts? I don't know all the details, but I think 100,000, maybe more. Plus decent insurance, plus company shares he inherited from his mother. Wow, not bad. And I thought he only had this house and nothing else. The old man saved money his whole life like a real miser. Now all those savings will go to much more reasonable and useful causes. Reasonable purposes. They talked about my money, earned through a lifetime of hard work, as if it were their own, to be disposed of at their discretion. What if he somehow figures out our plans? Shalila's voice took on a note of serious concern again. He'll never figure it out. He's old. His mind isn't what it used to be. He'll easily believe that the doctor is real, especially if he plays his role convincingly enough. His mind isn't what it used to be. They sincerely believe me to be a senile old man who could easily be fooled by any primitive lie. And no one else will suspect anything strange? Who would suspect anything? The neighbors? Murph snorted contemptuously. They'll be glad that the troublesome old man is no longer their constant headache, and he has no other close relatives. Troublesome old man. That's how my own only son referred to me behind my back when talking to his wife. Okay, then it's settled. Wednesday at 10 in the morning, Sheila concluded with the look of someone who was pleased with the successful negotiations. Are you absolutely sure that Hendricks won't double-cross us at the last minute? He's been in this dirty business for over 10 years. Fake medical certificates for forced admission to nursing homes, bogus psychiatric diagnoses for insurance fraud. A proven and reliable person in our business. Excellent. Then on Thursday morning, we can call the agent about organizing the first viewings of the house. They headed for the parked car. I quickly and quietly slipped through the kitchen to the back door and cautiously entered the house, trying not to make the slightest noise. My heart was pounding so hard and loudly in my chest that I was afraid they would hear it even from a great distance. Through the living room window, I watched them slowly get into their silver car. Murph started the engine, and they drove away calmly, without even bothering to come into the house and at least say hello to me, since they had come. I was left completely alone with my dark thoughts and the terrible discovery that had turned my whole life upside down. My only son and his wife had planned to betray me in the most despicable and cynical way. They wanted to deprive me of my home, all the money I had saved up in my life, my personal freedom, and my human dignity. And all this under the hypocritical guise of sincere concern for my health and well-being. Now I understood all their recent strange behavior, the thorough inspection of the house and grounds, the numerous photographs of valuable items, the intrusive questions about the technical condition and market value of all my property. They were methodically preparing for the upcoming sale, studying in advance the goods they were going to put on the real estate market. I slowly sank into my usual armchair and tried to collect my thoughts, which were fluttering around in my head like birds in a cage. What should I do now? How could I protect myself from people I had considered my family for many years, and whom I trusted unconditionally? Tomorrow is Wednesday. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, the fake Dr. Hendricks is supposed to arrive with a pre-prepared false certificate of my mental incapacity. I had only one day left to come up with an effective plan of defense and counterattack. First, I needed to make sure that I had heard and understood every word of their secret conversation correctly. Maybe in the dark and from a distance, I had misheard or misinterpreted something. But no, all the words sounded too clear and specific. The name of the corrupt doctor, the exact amount of the bribe, the day and time of arrival, detailed plans for selling the house and disposing of the money. Everything was stated clearly, in detail, and without any ambiguity. They really were going to betray me in the most disgusting way. And if I didn't take decisive action, in a week or two, I would find myself in a cheap nursing home on the outskirts of town, completely deprived of my home, all my savings, and the basic right to control my own life. But I was not going to give up without a serious fight. In my long 73 years of life, I had endured the Vietnam War, the loss of loved ones, the bankruptcy of my own business, and many other difficult trials. And I always found the strength to fight and win. I would cope with this misfortune as well. Murph and Sheila were deeply convinced that they were dealing with an old, helpless, and mentally retarded man who could be fooled by any primitive lie. Very soon they would learn from their own sad experience that they were wrong. Very, very wrong. I got up from my chair and walked over to the window. Behind the glass, the warm August day was quietly coming to an end. Martha's favorite roses were peacefully blooming in the garden, and kind Ray Collins was leisurely watering his flowers on the neighboring plot. Everything around looked normal, calm, and idyllic, but I now knew for sure that this outward bliss was deeply deceptive. Tomorrow morning, a real war would begin, a brutal war between me and the people who wanted to steal the rest of my life, and I was determined to win that war at any cost. I couldn't sleep all night, tossing and turning in bed and replaying the conversation I had overheard in my head. Every word Murphy and Sheila had said rang in my ears with frightening clarity. $5,000 for a false diagnosis, guardianship, a nursing home on Maplewood Street, selling the house for $350,000. By morning, I finally realized that sleep would not come, and I got out of bed. In the bathroom mirror, a tired man with eyes red from insomnia stared back at me, but I saw not senile infirmity in them, but cold determination. Murphy and Sheila had seriously miscalculated if they thought they were dealing with a senile old man. At breakfast, I forced myself to methodically think through the whole situation. The overheard conversation revealed a terrible truth to me, but it also explained many of the strange behaviors of my family that had been accumulating over the past few months. Now everything fell into place. I remembered how 6 months ago, Murphy had suddenly become interested in my health with some kind of obsessive insistence. He would start every conversation with questions about my well-being, blood pressure, and memory. At the time, it seemed like a belated display of filial concern. Now I understood. He was studying my condition, looking for signs that could be used against me. I remembered another episode, how about 3 months ago, Sheila brought me vitamins, insisting that they were necessary to maintain mental activity at my age. Vitamins for mental activity. Even then, she was hinting that something was wrong with my brain, and I even thanked her for her concern. A recent conversation with my neighbor, Mrs. Jennings, was particularly painful to recall. She mentioned that Sheila had been asking her about my habits. When I get up, go to bed, go out into the garden. At the time, I thought my daughter-in-law just wanted to know more about my daily routine. It turns out she was studying my habits for some of her own plans. Now I understood why Murphy was so interested in my finances. He asked me repeatedly about my bank accounts, insurance, and stocks. He said he was concerned about my financial security and offered to help me manage my money. At the time, I was proud that my son had finally grown up and was thinking about the future, but he was just assessing the size of his future prey. Even small things took on new meaning. How Sheila always criticized the state of my house, finding dust and dirt where there was none. How she constantly hinted at the dangers of living alone. How Murphy suddenly began to forget our family traditions. Martha's birthday, our wedding anniversary. He used to always call on those days. In the last year, not once. It was all part of a deliberate campaign to discredit my independence and competence. They methodically created an image of a frail, helpless old man who needed outside care. And I, like a fool, believed in their sincere concern. I got up from the table and walked around the house, looking at it with new eyes. Every room, every object had deep personal meaning for me. In the living room was the armchair that Martha and I had chosen for our first home together. On the mantelpiece were photographs of our entire life. In the bedroom was the bed where she died, holding my hand. To Murph and Sheila, it was all just merchandise with a price tag. $350,000 for the house. How much more for the antique furniture, the paintings, the silver? They were already figuring out how to divide the inheritance they hadn't received yet. It was especially painful to think about Murphy. I raised him alone after my divorce from my first wife. I worked 2 jobs to pay for his college tuition. When he married Sheila, I gave them money for the down payment on their house. And now he was planning to lock me up in a cheap nursing home. I tried to figure out when exactly my son had changed. Maybe it was Shelley's influence. She had always been a calculating woman who loved expensive things. Or was it problems in their marriage? In recent years, I had noticed tension between them, even though they tried to hide it. Or maybe it was money? Murphy worked as an insurance agent, but the market had become competitive. Perhaps they were having financial difficulties, and my inheritance seemed like an easy solution to all their problems. But whatever their motives, the fact remained that they were willing to destroy my life for their own gain. And they did it with cold calculation, carefully planning every step. I thought about Dr. Hendricks, who was supposed to arrive tomorrow. $5,000 for a false certificate of incapacity. How many other elderly people had he deceived? How many families had he destroyed with his false diagnoses? The system turned out to be more corrupt than I thought. Doctors, lawyers, officials, everyone had their price. And my own son knew who to turn to for dirty services. I remembered Ray Collins' story about his cousin, who had been cheated by his son into selling his house. At the time, I thought it was an isolated case of family greed. It turns out that such schemes were widespread. Children deceived their parents, taking advantage of their trust and legal loopholes. By noon, I finally realized that I had to act. Just sitting and waiting for tomorrow's visit from the fake doctor meant agreeing to my own destruction. I had less than a day left to protect myself. But how exactly could I defend myself? Could I prove that Dr. Hendricks was a fraud? I hardly had any documentary evidence. Could I go to the police? But what would I tell them? That I overheard a conversation between my son and daughter-in-law. It wasn't a crime until they committed fraud. I had to get ahead of them, take action before the fake doctor arrived, and I knew where to start. I went to the phone and dialed my bank's number. I found out their hours of operation and clarified what documents were needed for certain transactions. Then I called the notary I had dealt with when buying my house many years ago. I found out if he was still working and if I could make an appointment. After that, I dressed carefully, as if for an important meeting. I put on my best suit, a white shirt, and the tie Martha gave me for my last birthday. If I was going to fight for my life, I had to be fully prepared. As I left the house, I turned around and looked at it with a special feeling. Maybe I could defend it, or maybe this was one of the last days I would walk through it as its owner. But in any case, I would not let Murphy and Sheila steal it from me by deception. I had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best possible plan under the circumstances, and there was very little time left to carry it out. In the center of Louisville, in an old brick building on 4th Avenue, was Edward Blake's notary office. I remembered this place from the 70s when I had purchased my house here. Blake was a young, ambitious notary back then, and now he was a gray-haired but still energetic man in his 60s. "Mr. Clarkson," he rose from behind his massive oak desk and extended his hand. "It's been so long. The last time we saw each other was when you were drawing up your will after your wife's death." "Yes, Edward, that was 3 years ago, but today I need to change something in that will." Blake sat me down in a comfortable chair opposite his desk and listened attentively to my requests. I explained that I wanted to completely rewrite the will, depriving my only heir, my son, of all rights to the property. "That's a serious decision, Lemmet," said the notary, taking off his glasses and wiping them. "May I ask why? A family quarrel? Some kind of grudge?" I briefly told him about Murph and Sheila's plans, without going into detail about the conversation I had overheard. I simply said that I had learned of their intentions to have me declared incompetent and take possession of my property. "I understand," Blake nodded. Unfortunately, such cases are becoming more and more common. Adult children rush to get their inheritance without waiting for the natural course of events. I want to leave the house and all my property to the animal shelter on Bardstown Road, the one where Mrs. Jennings, my neighbor, volunteers. A charity is a good choice, but there's one problem limit. A will only takes effect after death, and if your son really plans to get guardianship over you, he will be able to change the will on your behalf as your legal guardian. These words hit me like a cold shower. I hadn't thought about this legal technicality. If Murphy gets guardianship, all my arrangements will be invalidated. Then what do you suggest? Blake thought for a moment, tapping his pen on the table. There is a way out. You can transfer ownership of the house to the animal shelter during your lifetime, but with the condition that you can live there for the rest of your life. This is called a gift agreement with encumbrance. The house will formally belong to the shelter, but you will retain the right to live in it for the rest of your life. And my son won't be able to revoke that when he gets custody? No. If the house is no longer your property, the guardian has no right to dispose of it. The most he can do is go to court and prove that you were incapacitated at the time the contract was signed. But for that, he will need strong evidence. The idea seemed brilliant to me. Murph and Sheila plan to get my house through guardianship, but they will get nothing, a house that no longer belongs to them. What about bank accounts and other property? That's more complicated. The guardian will be able to control the money in the accounts, but you can withdraw large sums now and donate them to the shelter as well. Keep only the minimum necessary for your current expenses. We worked out the details of the agreement for more than 2 hours. Blake explained all the legal intricacies, possible risks, and ways to minimize them to me. The shelter would receive a house worth $350,000, and I would retain the right to live in it for the rest of my life. When can we draw up the documents? I need to contact the shelter's management to get their consent to such an agreement. Charitable organizations don't usually turn down offers like this, but everything has to be done officially. Will the paperwork be ready tomorrow morning? If the shelter gives its consent this afternoon, then yes. Are you in a hurry? Very much so. I have reason to believe that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, my son will take action. Blake nodded understandingly. Then I'll contact the director of the orphanage right away. In the meantime, go to the bank and take care of the money. The bank was a few blocks away from the notary's office. The manager, Mr. Robert Taylor, had known me for over 20 years. He listened with surprise to my request to withdraw a significant amount from my deposit accounts. Mr. Clarkson, are you sure about this decision? The money in your deposits is earning a good return. Why transfer it to a charitable foundation? I explained the situation to him in general terms. Taylor frowned. Apparently, he had also had to deal with similar family intrigues. I understand your concerns, but there are restrictions on large transactions. I can give you no more than $50,000 in cash in one day. The rest must be transferred by wire. Can that be arranged? Of course. I will prepare the documents to transfer $100,000 to the Animal Shelter's Charitable Foundation. We will leave another $50,000 in your current account for daily expenses. What about stocks and bonds? They can also be transferred to the shelter, but it will take a few days. The stock market requires additional time to process the documents. We worked out all the details of the financial transactions. By the end of the day, most of my savings would have been transferred to the animal shelter. Murph and Sheila would be left with crumbs of the wealth they had counted on. As I left the bank, I felt a strange sense of relief. Yes, I was giving away almost all my money, but I was also depriving my betrayers of the opportunity to use it. Better that the money go to help homeless animals than to the people who plan to lock me up in a nursing home. The next stop on my route was Dr. Richard Stevens' clinic on Barrett Avenue. Stevens had been my family doctor for over 15 years. He knew my health well and could give an objective assessment of my mental capacity. Lemmet, what brings you here? The doctor rose from his desk when the nurse showed me into his office. You were here for a checkup just 2 months ago. Is something bothering you? Richard, I need a report on my mental state and capacity, a detailed one, with all the medical terms. Stevens raised his eyebrows in surprise. For what purpose? Insurance? Legal proceedings? I told him about my son and his wife's plans, about the fake doctor who was supposed to issue a false statement tomorrow about my incapacity. I see, the doctor nodded. I've dealt with similar cases. Some of my elderly patients have been victims of family fraud. He conducted a detailed examination of me, checking my memory, logical thinking, and decision-making abilities. He asked questions about current events, asked me to solve simple math problems, and assess the consequences of various actions. Your mental state is completely normal, Lemmet. There are no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or other disorders that affect your capacity to act. I will give you a detailed report with the results of all the tests. What if another doctor comes tomorrow and gives the opposite conclusion? Then that would be grounds for an investigation. Medical opinions on legal capacity must be based on objective data. If two doctors give radically different assessments of the same patient on the same day, that is reason to suspect fraud. After receiving the report from Dr. Stevens, I felt more confident. Now I have documentary evidence of my legal capacity issued by a reputable doctor. Any attempts to prove otherwise will look dubious. In the evening, I returned home tired but satisfied. The day had been productive. The main preparations for tomorrow's battle were complete. My house no longer belonged to me, but I retained the right to live in it. My money went to a charitable foundation, but at least it didn't go to the traitors. Now all that remained was to wait until tomorrow morning and see how Murph and Sheila would react to the collapse of their plans. They had a carefully thought-out plan to enrich themselves at my expense. But there was one element they hadn't taken into account, that an old fool might not be as stupid as they thought. On Wednesday morning, I woke up earlier than usual, at 5:30, and immediately felt an unusual calm. A decisive day lay ahead of me, but I was ready for it like never before. All the cards were laid out, all the moves were thought out. Now I had to see the faces of Murphy and Sheila when they realized that their carefully crafted plan had failed. I ate breakfast slowly, savoring every bite of scrambled eggs and bacon. This might have been my last breakfast in my house as its official owner, but I had no regrets. Better to give the house to an animal shelter and keep the right to live in it than to let Murphy sell it behind my back and lock me up in a cheap nursing home. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, Notary Blake called. "Lemmet, everything is ready," he said in a cheerful voice. "The shelter gladly accepted your offer. The documents have been drawn up and registered in the city real estate registry. As of today, the house officially belongs to the Friends of Animals charity, and you have the right to live there for the rest of your life." "Thank you, Edward. What about the bank transfers?" "Those are complete as well. $100,000 was deposited into the shelter's account last night." Mr. Taylor took care of everything very quickly. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Now I was practically a penniless 73-year-old man, but at least I was free from family intrigues. Murph could get custody of me, but he would have nothing to control. I no longer had a home or money. At 9:30, I sat down in a chair by the window with a newspaper, pretending to read. In fact, I was watching the street closely, waiting for guests to arrive. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, two cars stopped in the yard. Murphy's familiar silver Toyota and an unfamiliar black sedan. Murphy and Sheila got out of the Toyota. An elderly man in a dark suit with a small briefcase in his hand got out of the sedan. Dr. Hendricks himself. He looked quite respectable. Gray hair, a good-natured face, expensive glasses. The perfect image of a family doctor who could be trusted with the health of an elderly relative. They talked about something on the porch. Then Murphy rang the doorbell. I waited a few seconds before opening the door. "Hi, Dad." Murphy looked a little tense but tried to appear natural. "We brought Dr. Hendricks. Remember we talked about a routine checkup for the insurance company?" "Of course, son. Come in." Dr. Hendricks turned out to be a rather charming man. He greeted me warmly, asked how I was feeling, and complained about the hot weather. A professional deceiver who knew how to win over his victims. "Mr. Clarkson, this is just a formality," he said, settling into the living room and opening his briefcase. "The insurance company requires periodic medical examinations for clients over the age of 70. A few questions, a check of my blood pressure and pulse. That's all." I meekly agreed to the examination. Hendricks took my blood pressure, listened to my heart, and looked into my eyes with a small flashlight. Everything looked quite professional. Then he started asking questions. "What day of the week is it today?" "Wednesday." "And the date and month?" "August 23rd. "What is the president's name?" I answered all his questions correctly. Hendricks made notes in his notebook, occasionally grunting. Murphy and Sheila sat on the couch, watching intently. Now, a few questions about your lifestyle, the fake doctor continued. Do you live alone? Yes. And can you manage your household chores? Quite well. What about your memory? Do you forget to turn off the gas or lock the doors? No, everything is fine. I see. Hendricks made a few more notes. Don't you feel lonely in such a big house? Here we go. Leading questions designed to reveal my supposed inability to live independently. Sometimes, I admitted, but I have neighbors, friends. Of course, of course. Have you thought about moving to a place where you can socialize more with people your own age? I have. And do you think your son is taking good care of you? Very good. Hendricks continued asking questions for another 15 minutes. Most of them were aimed at revealing my alleged helplessness and dependence on outside help. I answered cautiously, giving no cause for accusations of inadequacy, but also not showing too much independence. Well, Mr. Clarkson, the examination is complete, Hendricks finally said, closing his notebook. I'll write up my report and send it to the insurance company. When will it be ready? Murphy asked. By this evening. I'll send it by email. They were about to leave, but I stopped them. Wait, there's something I wanted to tell you. Murphy and Sheila exchanged glances. A look of concern flashed across my son's face. He must have thought I suspected something. What is it, Dad? I went to the notary yesterday. I transferred the title to the house. There was a dead silence. Sheila turned pale, and Murphy froze with his mouth open. Even Hendricks stopped packing up his tools. What? What do you mean? Murphy muttered. I donated the house to an animal shelter, with lifetime occupancy rights, of course, but legally it no longer belongs to me. Are you kidding? Sheila jumped up from the sofa. Not at all. Here are the documents. I took a folder with notarized papers out of the desk drawer and handed it to Murphy. With trembling hands, he opened the folder and began to read. His face grew increasingly gray. Dad, do you understand what you've done? Murphy's voice was hoarse. I understand perfectly well. I made sure the house didn't go to people who don't deserve it. What people? Sheila snatched the documents from her husband and began to study them feverishly. This is your inheritance, our family inheritance, my inheritance, and I disposed of it as I saw fit. But why? Murph sank down onto the sofa as if his legs had given way. We're your family. Family? I smiled. You have an interesting concept of family, son. Meanwhile, Hendricks quickly gathered his things and headed for the door. I think I'd better leave. This is a family matter. No, doctor, stay, I said calmly. You haven't received your $5,000 for the false conclusion about my incapacity yet. Hendricks stopped dead in his tracks. His face turned ashen gray. I don't understand what you're talking about. Last night I overheard a conversation between my son and daughter-in-law in my garden. It was a very informative conversation about your services. Murphy and Sheila looked at me in horror. Their carefully thought-out plan was falling apart before their eyes. So, Dr. Hendricks, you don't even need to bother writing a false report. The house is no longer mine, and I have practically no money left. Guardianship over a poor old man is not a very profitable venture. How much money is left? Sheila asked hoarsely. $50,000 for current expenses. The rest went to the shelter too. Sorry for ruining your plans. Hendricks was the first to head for the door. I'm no longer needed here, he muttered and quickly left the house. Murphy and Sheila remained sitting on the sofa, looking at me as if I had suddenly turned into a stranger. In a sense, that was true. Their easygoing old father was gone, and in his place was a man who could stand up to them. Dad, Murphy began, but I raised my hand to stop him. Don't say anything, son. I understand. You can go. Murphy and Sheila didn't move, as if they couldn't believe what was happening. Sheila was still holding the documents transferring the house to the shelter, rereading them over and over, as if hoping to find some mistake or loophole. Can't this be reversed? She finally asked, looking up at me with eyes full of rage. Absolutely not. The documents are registered in the city real estate registry. The house officially belongs to a charitable foundation. But you didn't have to do this. Sheila's voice was becoming increasingly hysterical. We're your family. We took care of you. Took care of me? I smirked. That's a very peculiar kind of care, planning my confinement to a nursing home through a fake doctor. We wanted what was best for you. Murph finally found the strength to speak. Dad, you know it's hard for you to live alone in such a big house. I know. How would I know that? From your conversations about how cheap the nursing home on Maplewood Street is? Or from your plans to visit me there as little as possible? Murph blushed and looked away. He realized that I had heard much more than he had initially admitted. How much did you hear exactly? He asked quietly. Enough. I know about Dr. Hendricks and his rates. I know about the lawyer Simpson who prepared the guardianship papers. I know about real estate agent Johnson and the $350,000 appraisal of the house. Sheila jumped up from the sofa and began pacing the room, waving her arms. You had no right to eavesdrop on us. It was a private conversation. In my own garden? On my property? Who gave you the right to hide in the corner and make plans against me? We weren't making plans against you, Sheila shouted. We were thinking about your well-being. My well-being or $350,000? She stopped, breathing heavily. Her face showed that she was trying hard to pull herself together and find a new approach. Lemet, she said in a softer tone, you understand that you acted rashly. You gave the house to some strangers from the shelter. What if they decide to kick you out? I have a lifetime right of residence. It's legally protected. But anything can happen, she persisted. What if the shelter goes bankrupt? What if the house is sold? The new owners may not recognize your rights. That's my risk, and I'm willing to take it. Murph stood up and came over to me. In his eyes, I saw a mixture of anger, despair, and some kind of childish resentment. Dad, you understand that you've deprived me of my inheritance, right? I'm your only son. I have rights to this house. What rights? I looked at him intently. The right to inheritance arises after the death of the testator. As long as I am alive, this is my property, and I will dispose of it as I see fit. But that's unfair. Unfair. What was fair about your plans to lock me up in a cheap nursing home and forget I existed? Shalila returned to the sofa and sat down next to her husband. Now they both looked at me as if I were their enemy. You want to take revenge on us, she said coldly, for thinking about the nursing home. But you understand that at my age, I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions. I have a certificate from Dr. Stevens confirming my full legal capacity. I took the medical report out of the desk drawer and showed it to them. Murph took the document and read it. When did you do this? Yesterday, right after I found out about your plans with the fake doctor. So you planned everything in advance, Sheila said, her voice sounding something like respect for an opponent. The house, the money, the medical certificate. I just protected myself from people who wanted to cheat me. Murph handed me back the certificate and sighed heavily. Dad, what if we forget about the nursing home? Let's leave everything as it is. Can you cancel the gift? No, I can't, and I don't want to. But why? His voice sounded almost childish. We can discuss everything and find a compromise. A compromise? I shook my head. Son, you and your wife plan to take away my home, my money, and my freedom with the help of a fake doctor. What kind of compromise could there be? Sheila got up and walked over to the window. She stood there for a minute, looking at the garden, then turned to me. What are you going to do now? She asked. Live in a house that no longer belongs to you? For $50,000 for the rest of my life? I will. And you know what? I will sleep peacefully, knowing that my house will not go to the people who plan to betray me. Do you realize how cruel you have been to us? She continued. We were counting on the inheritance. We have plans, dreams. And I have the right to live out the rest of my life in my own home, without fear of being cheated and thrown out onto the street. Murphy got up from the sofa and walked over to the mantelpiece where his mother's photograph stood. Mom wouldn't have approved of what you did, he said without turning around. Those words hit a nerve, but I replied calmly, Martha wouldn't have approved of your plans with the fake doctor. She would have been horrified to learn that her son was willing to lock his father in a nursing home for money. It's not about the money, Murph turned to me. We really thought you'd be better off among your peers, under medical supervision. For a $5,000 bribe? He fell silent. There was nothing more to say in his defense. Sheila gathered the documents scattered across the sofa and stuffed them into her purse. "We're leaving," she announced. "But this isn't over. We'll find a way to challenge your actions. You can try. I have a certificate of legal capacity and witnesses to the fairness of the transaction. And you have a recording of a conversation with a fake doctor about buying a fake report." "What recording?" Murph snapped. "Did you think I would rely solely on my memory?" I smiled. "I have a tape recorder that recorded your conversation yesterday in the garden." It was a lie. I didn't have a recording. But they believed me. Their faces turned completely gray. That's that's illegal," Sheila muttered. "Recording a private conversation on my own property? It's perfectly legal, and very useful if you decide to take them to court." They exchanged glances and headed for the exit. At the door, Murphy turned around. "Dad, I was hoping we could resolve this peacefully. We could have, if you hadn't planned to deceive me." "We won't be coming back," Sheila said. "I know, and I'm not sad about it." They left, leaving behind only a heavy silence and the scent of Sheila's expensive perfume. I went to the window and watched them get into the car. Murph sat behind the wheel for a long time without starting the engine. Perhaps he was still hoping that I would come out and say it was all a joke. But I didn't come out, and after a few minutes they drove away. I was left alone in a house that no longer belonged to me, but where I could live out the rest of my days. I had no money, no family, no inheritance, but I had freedom and a clear conscience. In the evening, I sat in the garden watering Martha's roses. Tomorrow I'll call the shelter and meet the people who now own my house. Maybe I'll offer to help them with the garden or minor repairs. I have the time and the desire to be useful. Murphy and Sheila learned a good lesson. Not all old people can be fooled. Not all of them fall for family manipulation. Sometimes even a 73-year-old can outsmart young and ambitious swindlers.